Hello, this is Jessie Weaver's assignment for Lifespan Development Journal Number 2, My Transition Through Adolescence. The music you hear and a lot of the pictures you're going to be seeing feature me in my marching band uniform. QMB, or the Quaker Marching Band, was a major part of my life in my high school years. From freshman through senior year I participated. Many of my closest friends were also in the band, and my family volunteered a lot of their time traveling and doing different projects with the band. Since it was such a major part of my life, I wanted to feature them in this video of my adolescence development. According to Erikson, the main conflict for this age group is identity versus role confusion. Identity can encompass many aspects of a person's life. It includes their work path and career goals, their voting views, whether they're liberal or conservative, spiritual beliefs, their views on family and sexual orientation, and importantly for this age group, their defining characteristics and hobbies. The marching band was a great opportunity for me socially. It gave me a chance to excel in different leadership roles. It allowed me the opportunity to socialize with a large cluster of both males and females, providing strong relationships that have lasted now well into adulthood. It gave me a chance to become more of an extrovert instead of remaining the shy, quiet girl I once was, and really helped me to develop good skills outside the classroom, including negotiating, communication, conflict resolution when working with teachers or students and trying to make the best possible outcome for the band. Unlike some of my peers, my transition period through my teenage years was a relatively smooth one. As I mentioned in my first journal, one of my biggest family values was my relationship with my parents. We are very close, and I come from a very welcoming and warm home. As I grew older, they really instilled on me the importance of independence and making my own decisions. In the book, the developmental changes of Erikson is mentioned as having 4 statuses of identity. I truly believe that I achieved identity achievement with both crisis or exploring and commitment. That independence that my parents pushed on me really helped me to explore my options and my interests and decide what I wanted to do as an adult. After I found where my interests lie and what my talents were, I became very self-motivated in pushing for a career in higher education in that realm. Likewise, although I come from a very loving home and my parents pushed for independence, they also monitored me more than some of my peers. However, our relationship was built on trust and love, and just like in our book, I was more willing to discuss where I was going in my peer groups with my parents because it was a very open and trusting relationship. I had a curfew and I had certain rules I had to follow, but for the most part, there was never really any major conflict between my parents and myself. We also previously mentioned how important your role of attachment versus autonomy is in a younger child's relationship. Since I was very secure with my parents, I had very secure relationships with all of my friends and peers as well. I believe that by my parents allowing me to participate and have such independent freedoms, it'll really help me in my counseling setting as I remember to step back and let the client make their own decisions. Very few of my values changed in my transition from childhood to teenage years, with the exception of religion. Younger, we were raised as Catholics, and I were very much involved in the church, volunteering as altar servers and readers. However, when I was an adolescent, it was around this time that the Catholic Church revealed that there were charges brought against them involving priests and younger boys in sexual molestation. My mother was disgusted, and we ultimately left the church. This is not unusual for teenagers. In fact, in our book, Cohen, McHugh, and Iacono reference a study that revealed a sharp decline in religiousness between the ages of 14 and 20. I'm not sure how much my religion and faith-based practice would have declined had it not been for those charges. Interestingly enough, as an adult, I have again started going to the church, now as a Lutheran, and usually actively practice every week. As Kroger references in the book, identity development becomes a central focus of adolescence and emerging adulthood. It's difficult to ascertain how differently I would have turned out had I not had that sudden loss of religion in my teenage years. Being said, following what Bridgers and Snarley have discovered through their own studies of religious and how it impacts the teenage years, I still carried a lot of those values with me, regardless of the fact that I did not attend church regularly. I think my moral behavior was strongly developed through my church upbringing, and that continued well into my teenage years. Unlike some of my peers that sought out trouble and were into drugs and sexual promiscuity, I avoided all that and was happy to spend time at home or with my friends doing activities like going to the movies or going out to eat, as opposed to some other less positive activities. Unfortunately for me, I believe this could ultimately be a weakness in my professional career as a counselor. Unlike others who may have had a more rebellious stage and snuck out of the house and disobeyed their parents, I really never went through that kind of developmental torment and may have a harder time working with a teenage group. It may take some of my own conscience to remember that as teenagers, they don't think about the ramifications of adults, and their decision-making process may seem crazy to me, but to them, it's simply a norm and a challenge to stick it to the man. Brown and Dietz make a strong reference to peer pressure and cliques and crowds in our textbook, two aspects that truly define teenage life. Luckily for me, the clique I fell in with, mostly marching band kids, were a lot like me in respects they were all very strong, independent people, and they didn't really get into too much trouble. As far as peer pressure goes, I don't ever remember really having a lot of pressure from friends, aside from maybe conforming. Clothing shops like American Eagle and Old Navy were the must-have when I was growing up, but outside of that, there was never any real pressure to do drugs or try different things. One aspect I think where I differ a lot from my peers was the dating and romantic relationships. Although I didn't have trouble developing friendships with different males, I really was never interested in a lot of pursuing a love life. I'm not sure really where this stems from. It could just be the fact that I was a late bloomer. I thought boys my age were immature, and it wasn't until I reached my 20s where I really was interested in dating. Again, I think this aspect of being different from the norm might hinder me some ways in my professional counseling career. I have to remember that most teenagers are interested in dating everybody, and when they make poor decisions, I can't really try and put myself in their place and think I would have done at that age because I was a different person. Something else to keep in mind and be proactive about, being open to others. In my previous journal, I mentioned how my parents told me how important it was to accept everybody for who they are and not to create biasness. Being from a predominantly white community, I never really grew up with any kind of inclination to be against any races. However, one distinct change I remember making in my adolescence is just being more aware, not only of people's race and ethnic backgrounds, but mostly coming from a very wealthy community, being more aware of their socioeconomic status. The older we got, it was more and more evident whose family had money and whose did not. However, being raised in a home that taught against this kind of behavior, it was never really a big part of my life, and I chose to ignore whether or not others had money. Again, very little has changed in my views on cultural considerations from my childhood into my teenage years. I was still very enthusiastic and active in participating in traditional family events and dinners, and as an adult remain equally enthusiastic. I am proud of my heritage and where I come from, and it's important that as I eventually start my own family, I carry on these traditions. One of the biggest changes most adolescents, myself included, go through is a drastic increase in their own self-care. While kids are prone to be dirty and not really give much about your appearance, once you hit the age of 13, all of a sudden taking good care of yourself is one of the prime requirements, especially for women. Regularly showering, bathing, doing your hair, learning how to do makeup is all part of maturing in this kind of culture. Like many teenage girls, I had a small bout of depression when I was younger, just based on the fact that puberty and hormone changes are raging. Based on a study in our textbook by Graber and Sontage, by age 15, adolescent females have a rate of depression that is twice that of adolescent males. I was not alone in my bouts of the blues. Many of my peers had depressive symptoms as well. Luckily, none of my friends ever had such severe symptoms where suicide was an issue, myself included. Based on studies in our book for the National Health Center for Health Statistics, suicide is the third leading cause of death in 10 to 19-year-olds in the United States. Suicide was never anything that was really discussed much in school. I think looking back on it, they could have been more proactive in making sure that depression and that those kinds of symptoms were addressed early. I know in schools today there's a lot of pressure on bullying, but there's a lot more to it than growing up in adolescence. With a highly increased likelihood of suicide and depression, I feel it's something that really should be discussed. And early intervention should be used as a tactic to help avoid these kinds of situations. As a counselor, this is something I am acutely aware of and will want to make sure that when dealing with adolescents in this age group, just having them be sad might not be the root of the problem. There is a likelihood there may be more involved in that. This concludes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And this last photograph of me, which is me on my last day in my senior year of high school on my front porch. Thank you.